I'd like to introduce right now, obviously we've had a very robust conversation. It just wrapped up, not only about the strategies and the opportunities and some of the greater challenges that are faced for greater inclusion of children with disabilities globally. I'd like to introduce Chairman of the Special Olympics, Tim Shriver. He's going to be able to share a little bit of the dialogue and the conversations that have come out with his roundtable participants, and we have some of them up here on our stage. So, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I think we've just been a part of a historic gathering, to be honest. The first ever global roundtable to discuss the issue of people with intellectual disabilities. The first gathering that includes heads of state, heads of development banks, heads of non-governmental institutions, heads of UN agencies, ministers of sport, iconic athletes, and Special Olympics athletes together. It has never been done before. We hope and very much believe that this conversation, substantive as it was, although brief, will lead to action. We know, without a doubt, that people with intellectual disabilities are isolated. We equally know, without a doubt, that contact makes for change, that exposure to, familiarity with, friendships among people with and without intellectual differences is the secret of change. What we heard today was a commitment from very important leaders from the business community, the governmental community, and the civil society community to work together to create models of that change. Hopefully at the level of the African Union, at the level of the global development banks, at the level of business leaders, sports stars, ministers, to promote inclusive education, to promote inclusive childcare, to promote inclusive sport, to promote equal access to health care, and to promote community living, and even to promote inclusive employment. All these were mentioned today. This is the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, in some ways the most pioneering piece of legislation from a rights perspective on behalf of people with disabilities passed 25 years ago today in the United States. Today is not a day for us to celebrate. Frankly, it is a day to challenge. What has happened in this country is positive, but it has far from enough. And what has happened around the world with the passage of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities in a rights framework is positive, but it is only a beginning. Today, I hope we began to build the coalition of leaders necessary to make that beginning into a series of action steps that will result in equality and justice for people with intellectual and developmental differences around the world. I will turn this over now to my colleagues, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves so that you don't have to hear any longer from me. Thank you. Loretta.
I think I'm supposed to speak after Mr. Lake.
Oh, okay. Yeah. As usual, she knows what's going on, and I don't.
Never do what you're supposed to do. Here.
I'm just going by protocol.
Let me make just a common sense argument here. First of all, you have seen all of these wonderful athletes, and it is just plain wrong to see them and others like them excluded and stigmatized in countries around the world. But it's more than wrong. It is not only a disservice to them, it's a disservice to us and the whole world. Probably 1 out of 10 children in the world live with disabilities. Probably about 1/3 of the children who are not in school live with disabilities. And there is no question that a failure to take advantage of their talents is a drag on economic growth. So it makes common sense that we need to invest in these children and these people for their sake and for the sake of our societies, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to reach our development goals. We're not going to be able to create the kinds of healthy societies that we need. So look on this as both a moral cause and even more an investment by all of us, not just in their futures, but in our common future. Now?
Now.
Yes, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wish this room was full, but you know what? That's okay. Because I'm sure beyond the walls of this room, people were here. I'm just going to tell you a story of one person who represents maybe over 300 million people in this globe who have intellectual disability. By the way, my name is Loretta Claiborne. I'm a Special Olympics athlete. I live a happy life, but still today, I kind of fear. But I'm going to take you back a little bit in my life. When I was born with an intellectual disability. I was blind. I did not see. I had the shields removed from my eyes. I had problems with my feet. I used to wear a leg brace. I have 2 of my sesamoid bones out of my foot. But that's minor. I think the biggest hurdle I struck when my mother told me that I had intellectual disabilities. At the time, and this is only for the historical value of it, but I was told I was mentally retarded, and blunt words, retarded, which really hurt. We're talking about back in the 60s. My mother seen discrimination. She happened to be African American. She happened to be a woman. And back in her time, she drank out of certain water fountains. She went to an all-black school. So then she had these children, and she came, and she figured that all her children were going to be normal. Bingo, she had a child with intellectual disability. The doctor looked at her and says, "Miss Claiborne, I don't know about this one, it might won't make it." But her being the big, stern woman she was, oh no, you didn't mess with Rita. She had power. Power that nobody knew. And she raised her 7 children. And at one time, they told her, "Miss Claiborne, Loretta's going to have to be in an institution." Her broad way, she says, "Oh, no, you don't. I'll raise my baby and she'll do fine." And as time went by, I struggled. I got bullied. I got criticized. And as time went by, my mother just kept pushing for me to have an education. I remember one time when my mother took us all to the dentist, us 5 girls. The dentist checked everybody's teeth. And when the dentist got to me, he looked and told my mother, "Oh no, we don't do them. The retarded kids, you take them over to the clinic." And sat there and wait. This is good old US of A. Just a year ago, I had broken my finger in 2 places. And I went to a doctor. And no, I don't receive welfare. I have insurance, just like every other American. And when I went to the doctor looked and he says, "Oh yes, your finger's broken 2 places." And he didn't do anything for the finger. I kept on tying it up, banding it up, and I turned around and I picked up one of the folders. Well, here the doctor was a shoulder specialist. I said, "I'm done." I never went back. And that finger looks just as good as the other fingers. It's still a little swollen. But you know what? It goes to show, I guess I'm not good enough. I felt that I was discriminated against. Today, in our country, in our world, we have global leaders. I heard them in the room talk about the discrimination towards women, talk about discrimination towards children with intellectual and physical disability. We have a long way to go. The Right to Disability Act was passed 25 years, but I wonder if it also includes those with intellectual disability. Do I feel discriminated against because of the color of my skin? I would say yes, a little, but my real discrimination still to this day because of being a person with intellectual disability. I own my own home. I go to the bank, and the lady looks at me and says, "Oh, you can't handle this." I said, "Well, obviously I can, if you give me a chance and you listen to me. I'm just one." Today, at these games, these athletes are out there going out to be their best through sport, and they'll take what they learned on that playing ground, if they are able to, back to their country and be stronger, better people. But it will only happen if a call to action is made by each and every person that is here to take back to their government, to take back to their country, and not just talk, just not make an action, but do. Walk the walk, talk the talk. Stick to your guns is what we always say back in the city. I like to say, be persistent in what we do. And I think there will be one day that everyone will have the right to live, to work, to be educated, to have fun. Let's talk about work. My friends are still working in shelter workshops. And they're still only making $6 a week, some of them. And they are capable, and they're doing work for other countries. That's pretty sad in the good old US of A. So I can't even fathom what it would be like to be in another country. So we need to take an action, a call to action, to be included. And I always say, I shouldn't be excluded, I should be included. And when we're included, life will be better for all. Thank you so much.
Babatune Osotimehin. I'm the Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund. And I just want to say, after the very moving story, that it's our commitment at the UNFPA to reach out to every child, one at a time, wherever they may be, to make sure they're included in development. And as we look at the new development agenda which is coming, we have to emphasize the need for data. I think that data is probably the most important piece of intervention that we have to have if we are going to be able to account for everybody, include everybody, and leave nobody behind. And as has been said, the intellectually challenged person in the world, or the physically challenged person in the world, is the one that is easily left behind, because we actually don't want to take them along. And I think that we need to challenge ourselves as governments, as civil society, as the private sector, and that conversation we had there actually did say that. And I believe that going forward, we have to ensure that we make those commitments, they stand, and we ensure that there's accountability around it so that nobody is left behind and everybody is included. We have a universal agenda here, and I think that's an important piece. Thank you very much.
International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. In an event like this one, and over these last days, we feel there is no them and us, but we. But let's take that back, to the families, let's take that back to the communities, to help and support communities to reconcile themselves, with their own members, to help communities to go over the fear, the ignorance, the stigma, the discrimination, and sometimes the shame, in looking at, the different challenges that its own members do face, including people with intellectual disabilities. And that can only be achieved not to shift the whole burden to communities, but through partnerships between civil society organization, business, and member states, as well as UN organization. As a Red Cross and Red Crescent network, present in 189 national societies, with 17 million volunteers on the ground, we pledge to contribute to that partnership in responding to the needs of everybody, to accompany them to face the challenges they face. And if we do so, we realize that the same people, who are facing the multiple deprivations, that make them vulnerable, among them, we count many, if not in many cases, most people with intellectual disabilities. Among our own volunteers, we find also people with intellectual disabilities, and we take their messages very seriously. The message that they always tell us to remind ourselves, that they are not part of the problems, they want to be part of the solution, and the message that they always send us, please, nothing for us without us, and that's where inclusiveness begins, and that's what we pledge to work in partnership with all the distinguished members of this panel today. Thank you.
A final word from me. I just want to mention that one of the great things about the meeting we just had was we were discussing very practical opportunities for all of us to work together to walk the walk in the communities in countries around the world, and UNICEF and Special Olympics have had a strong and growing partnership working on the ground, and we intend both to make it grow and to expand it with others as well.